I'd like to introduce our friends from New Zealand. We have Jennifer Yarrow, who's the marketing manager, as well as our VIP chief winemaker, Jeff Clark, who will be doing the presenting. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to type into the chat. And guys, Jennifer, Jeff, we hand it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. Welcome, everyone. Nau mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all and welcome. As Lee said, I'm Jen Yarrow, the marketing manager here for OTU Estate, and with me is Jeff Clark, our chief winemaker. And today we're delighted to present to you our OTU Sauvignon Blancs for a tasting and Q&A. So we're delighted again to have trade connecting in from all over the States. It's 10 a.m. Tuesday morning here in New Zealand at Auckland, so we're a little bit ahead of the game, but we're excited to share our story and taste our 90 and 92 point Sauvignon Blancs with you today. I trust everyone has their glasses ready and our Sauvignon Blancs nicely chilled. Thumbs up if you have. But firstly, I'd like to formally introduce Jeff Clark, our chief winemaker. Jeff started his career in Australia at Penfolds Wines and then moved to New Zealand, where he further developed his craft for 17 years at Montana Wines and Pinot Ricard, where he gained significant experience in emerging cool climate varieties such as Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. And whilst at Montana as the head of the winemaking team there, he was honoured to be twice named as International White Winemaker of the Year at the IWC in London in '99 and again in Japan in 2003. He was also nominated by leading UK wine journalist Tim Aiken as one of his top 6 winemakers globally. So we're thrilled to have Jeff here as part of our OTU team. He brings a wealth of skill and experience. So today we're going to share a little bit about what makes the Awatere Valley of Marlborough so special for Sauvignon Blanc growing and what makes OTU Estate wines so different and so distinct. Then as we talk through the estate, its soil profiles, the different blocks, we're going to taste the 2 wines from the relevant block sites. And at the end of the tasting, we would like to answer your questions as you type them in. But first, I really wanted to show you a brief clip of the OTU Estate. I think it really gives you a good sense of and an insight into how our estate is laid out and how our terroir plays a part in the wine style and quality. So if we could show that clip now, that would be great. Our Wild Coast 100% grown story is pretty unique, and it delivers through in the taste profile of our Sauvignon Blancs in a big way. We're named for that ancient Awatere River that runs through our estate, and our OTU Sauvignon Blanc amplifies all that the Awatere terroir holds true. A backbone of minerality, crisp acidity, and aromas of tomato leaf and intense tropical fruit on the palate. The Awatere Valley in Marlborough is what I love to call the Wild West of Marlborough, and I'll never forget my first experience of the Awatere Valley. It's so different and so distinct from the flat, ordered plains of the Wairau Valley below. It's wind-blown, rough, dry, hilly, wild coast terrain conspires to produce distinctive, complex and edgy wines with vines that have to work really, really hard in this harsh environment. It is the most geographically distinct subregion of Marlborough, and this makes it very unique and special. But that's enough from me. Here's Jeff to share more about the Awatere Valley and how our state is made up and just what our points of difference are. And then let's get on with the tasting.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon to everybody. We've actually put quite a deal of information and data into this presentation. We won't cover all of it, but in talking with Lee, we'll be able to share some of that for you at a later date to pick up on some of the detail that maybe we just won't get through in this short period of time we have together. Thanks, Jen, if you would just roll through. So one of the first things that we wanted to introduce was essentially a descriptor of what is the differences, the variation between our terroir and the more traditional Wairau Valley. Obviously, Sauvignon Blanc in Marlborough was originated in, first plantings were in the Wairau Valley. The Awatere Valley had some small plantings there sort of 20 or 30 years ago compared to the main Wairau Valley some 40 or 50 years ago. But it really sort of took off in from about 2000 onwards. So roughly around about 20 years we've been producing down in the Awatere Valley. So distinctive features, it's windier, as we saw in the previous slide. We're right on the coast there. We're very much exposed to the winds that come through from the Antarctic. These are really quite cold winds coming off the ocean, which tends to keep the temperatures much lower than would be the case in the Wairau Valley. Because most of the weather, in actual fact, comes from the west, so we've got the two valleys basically in the south eastern corner of the South Island of New Zealand. Most of the weather actually pattern comes from the west, and so the rainfall tends to fall in the mountain ranges that run down the spine of the South Island. So we're in the rain shadow effect, and particularly so in the Awatere Valley. So we would have something like half the rainfall that falls in the Wairau Valley. As I said before, it's cooler because of those wind effects and also the influence of the ocean. Our vineyards are only maybe couple of 100 yards from the coast, anything up to maybe 1 or 2 miles. So as the daytime temperatures during summertime warm up, it's really only about maximum temperatures of around 70 Fahrenheit. In the evenings, the cool sea breezes tend to come in and cool down the valley much quicker than would be the case in the central Wairau. Because of the conditions that we are in, it's also sunnier. We get longer daylight times through the day, but then we have that modifying effect. The soil conditions are slightly different from the Wairau Valley. Essentially, the Wairau is underlain by a major aquifer. Most of the mountain snow washes down the Wairau Valley, and that feeds into the Wairau Valley. So a lot of the plantings in that central valley are fed through the aquifers. In some parts it may only be 2 or 3 feet below the vines itself. In the Awatere, we don't have that sort of situation. We have what we call wind-blown loess, which is loams, sitting on top of these alluvial gravels over this deep clay papalea, mudstone, which essentially was the, underwater sometime in the recent past. Geologically, New Zealand is a very young country, around about 270 million years old. In comparison, just across the ditch in Australia, those soils are something like 4 billion years old. So we're talking about very young soils, quite fertile. Essentially, the two islands came up out of the sea, in recent geological time. And so a lot of those soils are, as I say, mudstone, just laid down by the sea over, many years. That actually leaves us with soil conditions that are very free draining, allows the vines to manage their growth very nicely. So we're not excessively vigorous, but we can actually get deliciously ripe fruit there. So overall, we have perfect conditions for growing grapes, ripeness, but with a really classically these what we often call umami, sort of salt infused type of flavors that come through, nice savouriness and real intensity of flavour. Thanks, Jen. So this video basically just gives an indication of where our vineyards are situated over here in the Awatere Valley. You can see that the McKee vineyards and M3 and M4, which are vital components of our winemaking, situated, as I say, only a couple of 100 metres from the coast. And then we have Dysart's and Hammond Vineyard, which are key components of our winemaking, slightly further inland, but still very much under this maritime influence, affected by the conditions in the soil. So what are our key points of difference for O2 and the wines we're making? Outside of the terroir, which we've briefly described, all of our vines are 100% estate grown. We are managing our production in a boutique manner with a high quality focus. Our wines are, the Sauvignon Blancs are affiliated with the current and the recent appellation Marlborough wine. What does that mean? Essentially a group of the leading producers from Marlborough, a lot of the companies, as well as some of the newer ones, who are producing to this high quality, have got together and set some definitions for what makes high quality Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. So the real focus is on this quality, the integrity and authenticity. We have to be 100% grown and produced in Marlborough. We have to be 100% affiliated to and accredited under the New Zealand Sustainability Program, a key factor in all of that. What separates us between a lot of the other, larger producers that you may see in the US market? We're actually restricted in the amount of volume of grapes that we can take off the vines. Historically, that's been around about 12 tonnes per hectare. If we look at a lot of the other large producers nowadays, a lot of them are producing on vigorous soils. They're short of stock. Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is restricted in production at this point in time, and becoming more so as we go on. Therefore, they've allowed their growers, most of them are being actually supplied from growers rather than having their own estates these days. A number of them have been selling off their own properties to manage their vineyards. And some of those are growing at anything from 18 to 30 tonnes per hectare, massive crops. that leads to, grapes being, potentially underripe in certain harvests, lacking concentration, thin, watery, highly acidic wines that they have to ameliorate quite a lot to actually get up to a standard that would make quality wine. So wines that are coming through this appellation Marlborough wine, such as OTU, managing their crops much better, much more focus on delivering high quality wines for prestige production. And, I think that we also have introduced now, even in a tasting, blind tasting accreditation that all of our wines have to go through, judged by our peers, in order to determine whether or not our wines meet that standard of quality and authenticity. Our wines, we're also managing now in the winery to manage our fining agents such that they're all vegan friendly. So if that works in your market, then all the wines nowadays are made in order to satisfy that. So again, just, the points of difference, getting back to the terroir, we have these coastal, remote, rugged terroir. A lot of the vineyard blocks that you'll see, particularly on the Dysart and the Hammond blocks, are all north facing, which for us in the Southern Hemisphere is facing the sun. So we get long days, long hang time, as we would call it. So the vines mature gracefully over a long period of time, and in order to deliver this, real classic concentration of flavors and purity of fruit expression that we often get in New Zealand and in particular Marlborough grape growing. Right. So let's start some tasting. Hopefully everybody's got some nice wine to taste. If not, you'll just have to take my opinion of these wines for you. So we're going to start with the OTU Estate Sauvignon Blanc 2021. It was a great vintage for us. 21 was heralded by slightly lower cropping rates. I was talking about for us that if we're looking at 12 tonnes per hectare, we averaged in 2021 only 9 tonnes per hectare. That was because of lower fruit set, cooler flowering period in that vintage, but it gave us wonderfully intense flavors and characters. As you can see on this information, we've got a lot of the detail of where the grapes were sourced from, Dysart, you can see the McKee blocks, and also from Hammond. And then underneath that, there's some further detail that you can look at your leisure later on. For the harvest bricks, that's the measure of the sweetness of the grapes at that particular time. We were looking at fully ripe grapes, 21.5 is our sort of minimum standard, up to 22.4, which is nice, ripe, concentrated fruit. Really good pH and acid balances, and ultimately the wines led on to be hugely successful for us. Numerous gold medal and above awards in many publications, in particular, in your case, the Wine Spectator and the Wine Enthusiast. So what are we actually looking for in this wine? Classically, for us, what we would like to see in Awatere Sauvignon Blanc is that intensity of fruit aromas. What we get with those salty laden air, the cool airs that come in from the coast, is that intensifies some of those green characters. We often describe it, as Jen indicated before, tomato stalk. If you touch a tomato plant, you come away with this really sweet herbal note. It's almost like basil and other sweet green herbs. And that's an intensity of fruit characteristics that we get out of the type of fruit. As a winemaker for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, what am I trying to do? Essentially, it is to take the grapes off the vine when they're perfectly mature and ripe, get it into the winery, get the grapes pressed and juiced, fermented out, and get it into the bottle as fast as possible. So, you know, my control is really trying to manage the flavors out of the vineyard into the bottle with the least amount of interference. That's particularly a case of, you know, wines like the OTU Estate. So what we have from 21, you know, wonderful concentration of flavor. There's really crisp and delicious acidity. One of the things that we get with some of the concentration of flavors that we get out of these, some of these vineyards, such as the Dysart vineyard that you can see in front of you. You can see the coast not far away, the north-facing slopes that we deal through. We're getting these grape flavors perfectly ripe, and then in the winery, that's ultimately delivering a wine flavor that leaves your mouth wanting more. Our style of wine is really all about what we would really like to have is people actually coming back for that second or third glass. You know, we don't necessarily want a wine that's so overpowering that you say, that's one glass. No, we would like to actually have people coming back for that second glass because the mouth, it just feels like it really wants to taste some more. So, you know, ultimately what we really want to deliver is that wonderful intensity of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc with that lovely, clean, crisp finish with that, you know, minerality that comes from the type of soils that we have. So deliciously ripe, concentrated, a classic wine that really works well with as an aperitif. You know, when you're coming into the restaurant and you want to sit at the front bar, have a nice refreshing wine, or you've come home from a hard day at work and also, you know, looking for a lovely refreshing glass of wine that just revives your palate, etc. So we've just rolled through some of these blocks. This is the M4 block, planted in 2000. This is one that's right on the coast. This is probably the one that takes the longest to mature because it is really in one of the coolest sites. Really intense flavors that come from it. Slightly higher acidity than some of the riper blocks that we would get further inland. And, you know, ultimately that adds some of that umami, the really intense characters that we get. So let's move on to the next one. Limited release Sauvignon Blanc. What we were actually really endeavoring to do with the limited release Sauvignon Blanc is have a wine with all those wonderful characters that we get in our OTU Estate, but just ramp up some of the extra layers of complexity and character, a little bit more concentration, a little bit more richness in the wine. So what we normally do is we only produce the limited release in the exceptional vintages, where we're really looking for you know, slightly riper couple of parcels of wine off these blocks. In this particular case, they came 65% from Dysart and 35% from Hammond. They were some of the, thank you, Jen, some of the riper blocks that we had, really quite intense, passion fruit type aromas. And what we're looking for, you know, from a winemaker's perspective is probably just a little bit more of my influence. We put about 20% of this wine into older French oak, not to make a wine, oaky wine out of it, but really just to add a little bit of layer of complexity, toasty oak to come through. It spent 6 months in the barrel, both the, and the tank on the yeast lees of the wine. So that actually adds another textural or structural component into the wine. And this is a wine that we aim more for, you know, perhaps with a food type consumption occasion that we're looking for. So wine with a little bit more concentration of flavour, a little bit more richness, you know, well suited to having a meal with, say, white meats, seafood, fish, you know, maybe with a little bit more sauce, etc., that you might find with a buttered sauce or tomato sauce, etc. And we're really trying to actually make a wine that actually has all those refreshing, crisp characters, but it has a little bit more power and concentration to go with the wine.
Beautiful.
Yeah, drinking beautifully now, but that wine should also last, you know, at least 3 to 5 years further, and it just continue to improve and enrich the wine as it goes through. So I'm on the clock, so we'll quickly go through the OTU Estate Pinot Noir just to finish up, and then you can ask me all the questions that you might like to ask. So OTU Estate Pinot Noir 2020 was a very good vintage as well, particularly for Pinot Noir. We have a lot of clones of Pinot Noir planted in Marlborough, but we're just developing our resource currently. The D5 block that we planted on our Dysart's vineyard is about 6 or 7 years old now. That's just coming through. We have 2 clones of Pinot Noir that we've used in this particular one. One is Abel, which is a clone that was what we call a gumboot selection, was brought in by somebody from Burgundy in France. Brought in their garage rather than going in their luggage, I should say, rather than from their going through customs, etc. Planted in Marlborough and spread throughout Marlborough, and we're finding it's a terrific clone for us now. So this Pinot Noir really represents Marlborough in the glass, you know, red fruit characteristics, not over complicated with oak. This is our entry-level Pinot Noir, and we really, once again, want to have another wine that just speaks to the region, to Marlborough, the freshness that we get, the vitality of the fruit characteristics coming through. And again, you know, for that sitting out on the barbecue or whatever, just a nice, refreshing glass of wine. And I commend the wine to you. So, you know, just in summary, what we're after is the vinification to ultimately demonstrate the characteristics of our terroir. You know, we're focused on quality, trying to deliver, you know, the very best of what Marlborough does. And, you know, I think that they speak in those wines that we've had. So, Jen, I might hand it back to you now and see whether we've got some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time to see if we can answer some of your questions. I'll just see if I